They had previously been a part of a bigger group, and then it was the six, and then Marcelo ended up betraying them and leaving, and now they're down to the four. And this is their last attempt. Patricia says if she doesn't make it this attempt, she's done. She's stopping, and everybody understands. Welcome to Book Therapy. I'm your host, Kim Patton. There's no way to count how many books are floating around in this world. Some are decent, some are truly terrible, and some are great. Today we're going to take a deep dive into one great book. Together we will discover gems of truth and encouragement to help you face your current season of life. I'm ready, you're ready, let's get this party started. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Book Therapy. I have a memoir for you. But before we get to that, I just wanted to say thank you for listening. And if you haven't already, please consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen to the show. Thank you. Let's dive into the book. Today we are talking about Solito by Javier Zamora. This is a memoir from a poet. He's going back to his 9-year-old self and telling the story of when his parents, who had migrated to the United States, sent him on a journey from El Salvador to their home in the United States. The journey was over 3,000 miles. When I did my research, I got conflicting mileage. So it's somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 miles. And it was supposed to only take a few weeks, but it ended up taking 9 weeks total. And again, Javier was only 9 years old. My disclaimer for this book before we get started is that I'm not making any sort of political statements about immigrants and immigration and the border or anything. I am not Homeland Security. That is not my job. So if you're interested in that, just turn on the news because I think that they're talking about it. What I want to focus on today is the people and the story. First of all, this is a monster memoir. It is so long and it is so meticulous. I mean, Javier records every single detail. He didn't write about his journey until he was an adult, but he internalized it so much that he was able to go back and, with excruciating detail, recount the weeks that he spent on this trip. We're going to talk about 3 legs of the journey. He begins in El Salvador, and he talks about his home just like any little boy would talk about his home. He talks about school, the things he loves. He talks a lot about his grandparents and his family that he lives with and how fascinating his world is and how colorful and beautiful his days are. Simply beautiful. You get a good picture of the fruit stands and the little businesses that his family runs and the characters that surround his everyday life at home, in the neighborhood, and at school. He doesn't quite know how to tie his shoes. He has trouble going to the bathroom without significant assistance. I don't know how else to say that except that throughout the book, he gets better at it. So good for him. His name is Javier, but they have nicknames for him, and the people he travels with end up calling him Javiercito, which is like little Javier. This poet is an absolutely mind-blowing, incredible writer. The way he works with words is magical, and I especially love the Spanish that is sprinkled throughout the book. I speak Spanish, I know Spanish, but a lot of the words in here I had no idea what they meant. There's a lot of slang. I read in an article by the author that there's a Salvadoran slang called caliche, and he was quoting like an Instagram account at one point when he says that Salvadorans first speak caliche and then Spanish, and then their third language is sarcasm, which makes sense because throughout the book there's so much slang. I have a feeling if I looked up a lot of the words that he used throughout the book, there was probably a lot of swearing and cursing that, I mean, I know a few of them, but he on this journey probably learned quite a few new words as well. So he starts in El Salvador, his home, And there's only 9 chapters, but the chapters are very long. So he begins in his hometown with his grandfather, and they take 2 weeks to get to Guatemala, where his grandfather goes back home and Javier is on his own. As his grandpa is preparing for him to be separated and go out on his own with a group of travelers, his grandpa tells him things like, don't tell anyone how much money you have, don't tell anyone where you were born, don't tell them your parents' phone number, only in a real emergency. Emergency is if no one you know is around, or if you're apart from the group, only then talk to the nearest adult. Those are the biggest points. There are smaller ones like stay near Don Dago, if not him, Marcelo. Hold their hands when crossing streets. Eat as much as you can. You never know when you're going to eat again. He also says on page 69, my favorite technique he's taught me, the one I've perfected, is how to tell how much time is left until the sun goes down. I have a watch with me at all times. A black plastic Casio Molly bought for me a few weeks ago before Don Dago picked me up. But just in case I lose it, Grandpa has taught me how to hold my left hand out far in front, my arm straight. Then, like a flag, I shift my fingers to the right. I line my index to the bottom of the sun until my fingers reach the horizon. However many fingers there are, each equals 15 minutes to sunset. 4 fingers equals an hour. It's what I do right now on our walk to Don Carlos. There are about 30 minutes left. Grandpa sees me put my hand out. He smiles and taps my back. You've learned, he says in a soft voice. I love Grandpa like I love Abuelita. I didn't know I did. I didn't know he loved me. He's been patient like Molly. I'll miss him. At the very beginning, we see how Javier's relationship with his grandpa strengthens in those 2 weeks that they're together, but it's going to be the last time that he sees them. He sees him for a very long time. And I don't think he realizes that in the moment. And as I was reading this book, I was focused on the journey. I was focused on what was coming next and where they were going and the relationships between all the people. But what I didn't realize is when I got to the end of the book, I didn't know what I had been reading. I didn't feel the weight of holy cow until the end of the book. I think in the beginning, I was just kind of along for the ride. But as I got to the end of the book, I really, truly felt like I was witnessing a masterpiece. And as I went online afterwards and researched more about the author and his story, I felt the gravity of what he had been through and how this trauma of 9 weeks traveling to a place that he'd never been before with people he'd never met before caused a lot of problems in his life. And he did not deal with those problems until he was an adult and realized that the source of his pain was this 9-week journey. The second leg of the journey is when they're entering into Mexico, and they spend quite a bit of time in Mexico. There's hangups in the plan. His grandpa had told him, this is where you're going. These are the cities and states that you're stopping in. This is where the coyote will lead you. And as they go along the journey and his grandpa's not there anymore, the plan changes. And so they end up waiting in these buildings. They are depending on other people for their food and their water. They sleep crammed in beds or on the floor, and they have to take really quick showers. So he ends up kind of being thrown into this experience that he was not expecting because everything is taking longer than expected, and there are a lot of changes. So the group he's with, he ends up calling them the Six, and the main people he's with is a mom named Patricia and her daughter Carla, and then a man named Chino and a few others. So he kind of gets thrown under Patricia's wings because she's the mother figure, and so it's easy when they're faking the papers and the identities to just say that he's her son and Carla is his sister. And then eventually Chino becomes the written-in father. And so while they're all together in a group, Javier mostly spends time with Patricia and Carla. In Mexico, he has to learn to say things differently because there's different accents, there's different vocabulary, and food and even drinks that are normal to him are called something completely different, and he has to memorize it. They do a lot of traveling on boats, buses, vans, walking, all kinds of different modes of transportation to get from place to place. At one point, they are on the bus, and Patricia has told him to pretend that he's sleeping, but someone on the bus rats them out, and so they are kicked off the bus. This is Javier's first experience with the law and getting in trouble, and the police, yelling things, and him being kind of thrown on the ground. And it's just really rattling for him because he doesn't know what's going on, and he knows that he's in trouble, but he has to lie and say that he's from Mexico. And you can just tell as he describes his experience that it is incredibly traumatic for him. He describes the scene on page 124. On top of the asphalt road, it looks like the steam is rising. The bus is still parked. Cars wait in traffic behind it. One soldier is still checking papers. We were inside the bus. Now we're standing in front of guns. Big guns hanging from shoulder straps. Little guns on belts. The soldiers are wearing boots. Black ones, big leather ones. I remember the nuns telling me, during emergencies, you can pray without kneeling. Their guns shine when the sun hits the metal a certain way. Every night since Grandpa left, I've whispered a Padre Nuestro lying in bed. I start, Padre Nuestro que estás en el cielo. Throw your backpacks in front, all of you, the soldier says calmly without shouting. On this trip, Javier is introduced to many different men who are trying to get him to where he needs to go. His parents in the USA have paid for this migration, and so the person in charge is called a coyote, and they are responsible for getting this group of people across the border. The people have paid for one attempt or sometimes multiple attempts. And so the coyote's responsibility is to collect the money and deliver these people to whoever has paid. Javier is always trying to figure out who he can trust. He learns that he can trust Patricia, and Carla is a kid like him. And with time, he learns he can trust Chino, but his grandpa has told him to trust this other man named Marcelo and the coyote. But the coyote leaves, and they're transferred to a different coyote who Javier does not know. And Marcelo has a temper. And so Javier finds it difficult to trust Marcelo, even though that's who his grandpa told him to stick next to. But he's not really taking care of Javier. And so Javier kind of just sticks with Patricia and then eventually Chino. Something really cool throughout the book is when Javier mentions music and how it reminds him of his family, and he, sings the lyrics with Patricia and Carla, and whether they're in a bus or in a van or just between the group, they love to remember the songs that make them happy and remind them of home. He says on page 133, the breeze enters through the crack in the window. I miss my home, my family. I want to sleep. I try closing my eyes. We're driving to Acapulco. The sun is a point in the sky, the same sun I saw rise today on that beautiful beach. Seems like days ago. The boats, the soldiers, the walk, the flying fish, the beach, the trucks, the shower, the 3 minutes. Time to this 9-year-old boy is completely out of whack. He's living the longest days of his life right now. As we get further on in the book, we enter part 3, which is the desert. I do not like this part. I'll be honest. It was hard to read, especially when Patricia runs into a cactus. They're running because the La Migra, the migrant, what do you call them? The immigration police or the border police, they have helicopters and they're shining lights and trying to find people in the desert. And Javier and his group has to hide. They have to be very still, either lie flat on the ground in their dark clothes, or they have to hide under a bush. And they have to climb fences and under fences. And Chino really helps him get through that. And Javier feels like it's a game, like him, army crawling underneath the fence and doing it faster each time. So that part is not so bad, but when they describe how Patricia runs into a cactus and has those little needles all over her body, I just shuddered. It just sounded absolutely terrible. As they prepare for the desert, he describes the water situation on page 205. He says, Paco takes a thick roll of duct tape and starts making handles for the water so the adults can carry them easier. I pick up a jug just to try. It's heavy. You carry these. Paco hands Carla and me smaller plastic bottles with a duct tape sling. Drink from these two. Hydrate, he tells everyone as he passes 2 untaped jugs around. Everyone is moving. Backpacks open and close. Drink more, Mario says. As we drink, Paco looks around and says, I'm not coming with you, but I'm driving you to where you're starting. Go to the bathroom, because we're driving an hour and then we wait for everyone to get there. And when we start walking, we won't stop. He says as they're beginning to walk on page 223, my arms have markings of the rocks from when I crawled under. Imprints. It's worth it. My hands are scratched and I can feel a thorn in my left palm, but that's okay. We keep walking. The fences can't stop us. We get to another one and we're masters. Chele and Marcelo help each other. Mario helps Patricia and Carla. Chino helps me. None of us get stuck. Other people do, so we make up a few positions in line. I'm so awake. It's almost 11, the latest I've stayed up since the boats, and I'm not tired at all. My favorite part of the whole book comes near the end when Chino, Patricia, Carla, and Javier are the 4. They had previously been a part of a bigger group, and then it was the 6, and then Marcelo ended up betraying them and leaving, and now they're down to the 4. And this is their last attempt. Patricia says if she doesn't make it this attempt, she's done. She's stopping, and everybody understands. But Chino is about 19 years old, and Javier is 9, and he's been walking for hours, for days, and Chino carries him on his back. On page 318, Javier says, Chino picked me up and threw me on top of his backpack. I wrapped my arms around his neck. Half an hour went by, or more, I don't know. I slept. Then he put me down. I walked for half an hour and then went back up. We've been doing this the past few hours. It's 3:30 a.m. Patricia can't carry Carla, but Chino pulls Carla's hand. I like riding on his back. I'm Aladdin in the desert. Chino is my carpet. Where's the genie? I don't know, but I'd ask for a lake. We walk in silence, crunching the ground. I hold on to Chino's neck. Chino puts me down and tells Carla, your turn. She's been dragging her feet. My legs wobble. She climbs on his back. He pulls my hand. I can't handle that. These are strangers, but they've been traveling together for weeks, and Chino absolutely gives up his body in sacrifice for these kids to help them get to the end. And they are running out of water. I mean, they are at severe risk of dehydration and death. And Chino doesn't care. He takes care of them. He took the needles out of Patricia's face and hands and legs one by one. This part of the story is what Javier wants the world to see. He wants everybody to see Chino and Patricia for who they are. Humans who are trying their best to get to freedom and who are sacrificing everything for others. That's what Javier wants to remember about this 9-year-old boy. He's suffered through many hours of therapy to get back to this 9-year-old boy, because throughout his whole life, he's been carrying him with him in his heart, in his body. And he referenced the book, The Body Keeps the Score, because he knows that in order to face his present, he has to go back and face his past. We talked about the 3 parts of his journey, how he started in El Salvador, he traveled through Guatemala and Mexico and the Sonoran Desert, and he did eventually make it to the United States to reunite with his parents. At the end, he talks about why he wrote this book. He says on page 380, I didn't dwell on what happened to me those 7 weeks from El Salvador to California. I never forgot Chino, Patricia, Carla, Chele, Marcelo, and every other person I encountered, but remembering them was painful. It wasn't until I started writing poetry and later this book, An Impossibility Without Massive Help from my therapist, that I felt courageous and healed enough to revisit the places, the people, and the events that shaped me. My hope for this book is that somehow it will reunite me with Chino, Patricia, and Carla, that I will find out what happened to them after we separated and learn what their lives have been like in this country. I don't believe I ever thanked them. I want to thank them now, as an adult, for risking their lives for a 9-year-old they did not know. Thank you for listening to another episode of Book Therapy. Today we talked about Solito by Javier Zamora. I would recommend this book, and also just getting to know Javier as a person, because he is a really special human being, and I love seeing his photos on Instagram. He recently got married, and his approach to this book is that of healing and getting back in touch with a traumatic event that shaped him into who he is today. But in a lot of the interviews and articles that I read, it's really interesting to see his point of view of why did he take this trip. His parents wanted him to, and for many years, that's the question that he asked himself. Like, why am I here? Why am I in the United States? And as an immigrant, he's caught between two worlds. He's in the United States with his family, but yet he left his family in El Salvador as well. And he had to hide his Latino identity for many years as well because of his immigration status. So it's all super interesting, and it's just shedding light on what people go through and how we don't really know what they've been through and what they're suffering with. Reading this book helped open my eyes to the immigrant story, and I'm going to do my best to honor their story. All right, see you next time. Throw your backpacks in front, all of you. The mustache soldier. It's not going to happen.